Today's case is being narrated by the amazing channel Nocturna, who specialises in scary stories in Spanish. If this is something that interests you, I've left a link below. So now sit back as Nocturna takes us to 21st century Spain.
Remedios Sánchez was born on the 22nd of July 1957 in the small village of Cristóbal de Dormea in Galicia, northwest Spain. She was one of 11 children and was the only girl. Although she was sometimes treated differently by her parents, she wasn't spoilt. She grew up in a small house, the family struggled economically, and as soon as they were able, her brothers were sent to work. Cristóbal de Dormea was a nice place for a child to grow up in, and Remedios would spend hours in the evening playing in the streets. But by 1973, when she was 16 years old, she had grown up tired of the slow-paced rural life and the cramped conditions she had to endure. So with the agreement of her parents, she boarded a bus and set off for the 1,000-kilometer journey to find what she hoped would be a far better life on the other side of the country. Remedios soon found a job as a cook and was happy living and working in the city. In 1975, the country's leader, General Franco, died and Spain started a period of social and political change. Remedios embraced these changing times, and in 1977, the country had its first free elections for 41 years. This was a very good time for her and her country. Politicians made great efforts to modernize and expand the economy, and there was a large increase in foreign investment. Spain was suddenly considered a very fashionable place to be, and in 1982, the country hosted the Football World Cup. So between the 13th of June and the 11th of July, the eyes of the world were focused on Spain. Remedios benefited from Spain's economic success. She was never without employment and continued to work as a cook. She got married and gave birth to twin boys. Her life in cosmopolitan Barcelona was very different to her childhood in the small village of Cristóbal de Dormea. And from the outside, it seemed that she was happy, but Remedios hid something from her friends and family. Something she tried to tell herself was just a hobby, but it was becoming far more than that. It was also putting a strain on her marriage and her finances, as Remedios Sánchez would all too often go out at night and spend all of her money playing slot machines. Slot machines were a very new thing for her, and under General Franco's rule, gambling was illegal in Spain. But now, with all the reforms, she could play whenever she wanted. She started to play more and more. Her relationship suffered, and eventually, after over 20 years of marriage, Remedios' husband left the family home. Her two boys decided to join him and urged their mother to seek help for her addiction. But the breakup of her family had a completely different effect on her. It severely undermined her confidence and shattered her self-esteem. Remedios was a popular person and had many friends who she could rely on, but she didn't confide in any of them. Instead, she would talk about the exciting life she had and how much money she was winning. But she wasn't winning, and she barely had enough to get by. After the relationship with her husband ended, she had another 2 relationships, but both of them ended when they realized that she had a gambling addiction, which she seemed reluctant to face up to. She was still working as a cook, now in a bar called Cebreiro, which was owned by a couple from Galicia. It was a nice place to work, as everyone got on very well, and Remedios was popular with the staff and the customers, many of whom were police officers. The wages were good, and most people would have been able to live quite adequately on what she was paid. But it was not enough. She was also in the process of buying her ex-boyfriend, a taxi driver named Rafael, out of the apartment they had purchased together. She realized that she would have to look for other ways to fund her lifestyle. Remedios started to befriend elderly ladies. She would meet them in the church, in the markets, or just sitting in the squares. Many of these women would be widows and often dressed in black. She would come across as a caring and sympathetic lady. She would sometimes listen to them tell stories about their life and how things had changed so much since November 1975. But on other occasions, she would just observe them and follow them home to find out where they lived. On June 10th of 2006, Police found the body of an 83-year-old lady named Josefa Cervantes at her home. On examining the body, they could see knife wounds to her arms, so she had obviously tried in vain to defend herself. The cause of death, however, was strangulation by using something like a tea towel. There was jewellery and money missing from the house. 8 days later, on June the 18th, an 80-year-old lady named Rosa reported that a woman had knocked on her door telling her that she was the girlfriend of a neighbour and was concerned about what type of man he was. Rosa told the police that the woman was quite charming, so she invited her in, but when she closed the door, the woman started to punch and kick her, and then strangled her with a towel until she lost consciousness. When she came round, her jewellery and money were gone. The next attack on a vulnerable elderly lady was reported to the police on June the 21st, when an 87-year-old lady named Rosario was returning to her apartment. As she reached her door, she was approached by a woman who grabbed her by the hair and pushed her inside. The woman then started to attack her. She then strangled her until she lost consciousness. Again, the lady reported that when she came round, her money and jewellery were missing. The police realised that these crimes were all carried out by the same person, and unless they apprehended the culprit quickly, they would undoubtedly strike again. But the description given by the two ladies who survived the attacks were not very detailed or consistent. 3 days later, a lady knocked on the door of an 83-year-old named Pilar. She explained that there was a gas leak in the building and she had to check her apartment. The elderly lady let the woman in, but the same thing happened. The woman strangled the lady with a towel and left her unconscious while she robbed her home. The following day, the woman struck again, but after entering the property of a 70-year-old Alicia, she discovered that the lady did not live alone and her husband was in the next room, so she quickly left. On June 28th, the police were called to Villarroel Street, where they discovered the body of a 96-year-old lady named Adelaida Heranzani. She had been punched and strangled, and about 1,200 euros had been stolen from her bedroom drawer. The press were reporting the crimes, and the residents of Barcelona suddenly became ever more vigilant. The children of elderly parents were telling them to be very careful and not to answer the door to anyone who they did not know. But on the 1st of July, the body of a 76-year-old lady named Marie Sahun was found at her home on Montaner Street. This time, the killer had also taken jewellery, 500 euros, bank books, and some valuable old coins. The news channels and the papers covered the story and reiterated their call for all elderly people to be very vigilant while this dangerous criminal was at large, but not everyone took any notice of the warnings, and on the 3rd of July, an 85-year-old lady named Montserrat allowed a lady to enter her home, as she apparently had a package for a neighbour and she asked if she could leave it there. The woman strangled Montserrat with a towel and then robbed her. Fortunately, the 85-year-old survived. The police had little to go on. They knew that the attacker was a woman, about 50 years old, who spoke with a Galician accent. She had a scar on her hand and she always approached vulnerable women. The investigation was run by the very experienced Mossos d'Esquadra. He was the chief of Barcelona's criminal investigation unit and realised that he was looking for a person whose attacks were getting more frequent. He instructed his investigators to work around the clock to find the perpetrator, but there were no leads, and as the situation was so serious, he called a press conference making a direct appeal to the city's elderly citizens. He told them that under no circumstances were they to let any unknown woman into their homes. At the time, it was known that there were in excess of 50,000 women over the age of 70 who lived alone in Barcelona. Detectives spent hours reviewing CCTV from near to the victims' homes when they suddenly got a breakthrough. The same woman was spotted at an ATM machine close to one attack and at a subway station immediately following another. And on one image, the woman's face was bruised as if she had been in a struggle. But who was this mysterious woman? It was certainly no one they had currently had on their criminal database. Chief Inspector de Escuadra thought that as these random attacks were purely to obtain cash and items that could be easily sold, the perpetrator may be someone who frequented the bingo halls to play the many slot machines available there. So he instructed his detectives to look at the CCTV from the bingo halls in the areas where the crimes took place. Remarkably, they found CCTV images of the woman they had seen on the CCTV footage near the ATM machine and the subway. The detectives went to the bingo hall, who fortunately had a copy of the woman's ID. The police then immediately went to her address, but the woman no longer lived there. They continued to investigate, and witnesses told them that they believed that the woman worked in the Cebreiro bar, very close to a police station, in fact. The detectives went to the bar and discreetly asked if they could speak to Remedios Sánchez, but she was not at work. She had already finished for the day. It was July the 4th. Fearful that she may be preparing another attack, they obtained her mobile phone number and started to track it. And more than 200 officers combed the streets to find the elusive Remedios. In the distance, one detective could see the neon lights of a bingo hall. He entered and saw a dark-haired, middle-aged woman sitting at a slot machine. He moved closer, and there she was, the smiling face of Remedios Sánchez, happily playing her favourite game. He arrested her, but she seemed confused. She kept saying that she had not done anything. Now, joined by more officers, Remedios was searched, and in her bag they found lots of cash and some jewellery. As she realised what was happening, she started shouting at the officers, telling them that they had the wrong person. But when she arrived at the station, she had calmed down and refused to answer any questions. The story of the arrest was soon picked up by the press and was front-page news across Spain. Police went to her apartment. They meticulously searched all the rooms and found jewellery and other valuable items that had been taken from the victims' homes. There were 6 neatly kept jewellery boxes full of small things such as rings and bracelets. They also retrieved watches, chains and necklaces. These were mainly scattered all over the place, on tables, in drawers and on sideboards, as well as 3 bank books, 2 credit cards and a selection of rare coins. They managed to trace some of the people that purchased stolen items, and they had identified Remedios as the person who had sold them. Police continued to question her, but she was proving difficult to break down and said nothing. Eventually, however, she told them that she had not committed any of these crimes and instead blamed them on a woman named Mari, who was renting a room in her apartment. She claimed that they had agreed that Mari would not pay her in cash, but would substitute this with items of jewellery. The press and the police considered this to be very unlikely. Nevertheless, the police investigated her claim, but found no evidence to support it. The trial of Remedios Sánchez began in June 2008. She was being prosecuted for 3 murders and 4 attempted murders, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution told the court that she specifically targeted the elderly who were especially vulnerable. She took advantage of their kindness to access their homes, rob and kill them, and to feed her addiction of playing slot machines. Medical experts ruled out that she was suffering from any personality disorder, or that she was addicted to gambling, even though every robbery was followed by a visit to the bingo halls. The prosecution told the court that the defendant had an impoverished childhood in a remote Galician village and descended into life of crime in order to maintain her current lifestyle. The defense only offered the story of the alleged tenant named Mari, but the judge told the court that this version of events seemed highly implausible, and the ladies who survived the attacks all said that it was the defendant who entered their homes and that she had acted alone. The trial ended on the 3rd of July 2008, and the defendant Remedios Sánchez was found guilty on 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder, for which the judge sentenced her to 144 years in prison and ordered her to pay compensation totaling €442,130 to the relatives of the deceased and the victims who survived. Hi everyone, thank you so much for listening to this case. I hope you've enjoyed it. I have a channel called Nocturna where I narrate horror stories and publish weekly. The horror stories are in Spanish. If this is something that you are interested in, please head over and subscribe. The link is in the description below. I also want to give a really special thanks to Briefcase for having me on here. I've really enjoyed reading this case. For now, stay safe and see you. Nos vemos en Nocturna.
Thank you so much, Nocturna, for narrating this story. As previously stated, there is a link to her channel below. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case.